Hey guys, welcome back. So because we are approaching fall and what I like to call the mystery slash thriller season, I thought now would actually be the perfect time to talk about one of my favorite mystery subgenres. Now, these books may actually seem familiar to you, and you may not have actually realized that they are part of a particular subgenre within the mystery genre. In fact, I have adored this subgenre of mysteries before I even knew that it had a name. And when I finally figured out that it actually was its own subgenre, I got super excited because I was able to more directly cater my tastes and add books to my TBR that I knew would have all of the elements that I love in these mysteries. Now, as far as the mysteries, what I'm talking about are called closed circle mysteries. And if you've never heard of that term before, don't worry, you're not alone. It's actually a popular subgenre, but the name itself, like I said, I don't really hear a lot of. So I want to explain to you first what this subgenre is, as well as give you some examples slash recommendations so that if you're like me and you like this trope and all of the things that go into it, you can have some books to add to your TBR. Okay, so what is a closed circle mystery? Now, basically what that is a mystery in which there is a closed circle of suspects, meaning a limited suspect pool. So somebody within this small group of people is the killer. And so therefore you are basically getting all of your cast of characters as suspects. Now, a perfect example of this is none other than Dame Agatha Christie. In fact, I believe her books may have been the ones to kind of kick off this subgenre. And as far as examples, we've got Death on the Nile, Murder on the Orient Express, one of my favorites, which is Cards on the Table. Basically, all of these books, or all of these stories rather, consist of a cast of characters where one of them has to be the killer and all of them are suspects. So it's not a mystery, for example, where there is a murder and you're following along with the main character to figure it out and the killer ends up being like this random person that you never heard of and didn't have any clue or indication that it was them. One of the suspects that you will see in the story has to be the killer. And before I knew about this genre, or rather what it was called, I would really just go around and say that I like group suspect mysteries, which I guess I wasn't too far off the bar there, but I didn't know how to explain it because basically what you've got is a group of people who are usually thrown together in a situation like an isolated area or a locked room, which I'll get to in just a second in terms of the differences. And one of them has to be the killer. But now that I know the actual term, like I said, I feel so much more comfortable, Googling or looking up books that fall within that subgenre. Now, in terms of locked room mysteries, I do want to touch on this really quickly because they are similar to one another, but they each have their differences and oftentimes they can overlap. So when it comes to locked room mysteries, basically what you've got is an impossible crime, and that means that it is seemingly impossible for this crime to have happened, and oftentimes it's considered locked room because it has happened in a locked room, meaning that there is no obvious way in or out for the killer to have committed the crime. But it doesn't have to be literally in a locked room. It could easily be a situation where, perfect example, I actually just read a book in the In Death series, if you guys saw my wrap up, where I mentioned that a death takes place on stage, and that was almost seemingly impossible. I would consider that a locked room mystery because everybody was watching the cast of characters on the stage and yet the murder still happened. So there is slight differences between the two of them, but again, there can be some overlap, especially when it comes to Agatha Christie books, for example. So like Murder on the Orient Express is both a locked room mystery as well as a closed circle mystery. My phone. Okay, so now that I've given you an explanation and kind of explained the differences between them and what exactly a closed circle mystery is, let's jump into some examples and recommendations. So, as I mentioned earlier, Dame Agatha Christie is the obvious choice, and even though a lot of these books, if not all of them, are very famous and very popular, I did want to go ahead and mention them on the off chance that anybody watching this may not be familiar with her work or some of these books that I am about to name. So the first one that I want to talk about is Murder on the Orient Express. This one has been adapted countless times on screen. We've got even just one that just came out like 3 years ago as the most recent rendition, but basically, with this one, we have a cast of characters who are on a train and somebody ends up murdered. And so naturally, your closed circle of suspects are the people who are on a train. I love this one. And in fact, one of the things that I love about this style of mystery is that everybody is a suspect, basically. And so what that means is that the writing has to be really tight with a lot of red herrings oftentimes, because you know somebody within that cast of characters has committed the crime and you don't want to be able to figure it out super easily. So there are a lot of shady things or secrets or like I said, red herrings to throw you off, because one of the small pool of people have to have done the crime. Another example that we have also by Agatha Christie is And Then There Were None. This one obviously is also a close circle of suspects, and it takes place on a deserted island with a mansion. You've got a group of people who are summoned there by some mysterious host, and then one by one each of them starts dying. Now this one is extremely interesting because not only do you have your small pool of characters who are all suspects, but the list actually starts whittling down because they all start dying. So, you may start off with 10 suspects, but then you've got 9 suspects, 8 suspects, etc., etc. Again, this one is excellent. There is a reason that her work still holds up even today, and this book is a prime example of why. Okay, so another Agatha Christie, guys, I swear she is so great, and if you like this subgenre of mysteries, please check these books out because they're just all so good. So next up, we've got Death on the Nile. This one is very similar to Murder in the Orient Express in that it takes place on like a moving vehicle type of transportation. But instead of it being on a train, it happens on a boat, and again, somebody ends up dying. This one actually doubles as a locked room mystery because the person is in their room when they end up dying, and we're trying to figure out obviously who did it amongst this larger cast of characters. And last up, okay, I know I'm giving too many Agatha Christie examples, but maybe this one isn't as popular. I haven't actually seen it adapted multiple times, so maybe this will be a new one for you, but that is Cards on the Table. This one is both a closed circle mystery as well as a locked room mystery, because what ends up happening is you have a group of people who are over at someone's house, literally just playing cards, hanging out, and one of the people at this kind of gathering ends up dying. And, we've got Poirot. Side note, Poirot actually is our detective in all of these, by the way. But anyway, we've got Poirot trying to figure out who amongst the cast of characters committed the crime. So those are your Agatha Christie examples / recommendations. Again, I know most of these you probably have already heard of, but on the off chance that they're new to you, I highly recommend checking them out. Again, even though these are older books, she really just kind of like spearheaded this subgenre, and it's worth checking out because her books are basically the foundation of a lot of mystery books that are written today, as well as the books that I'm about to list off now, which are obviously more contemporary. Speaking of contemporary, let's dive into a list of more recent recommendations. All of these are absolute favorites of mine, but by no means is this a comprehensive list, but rather a starting off point. So first up, we have Shari Lapena's The Guest List, and I raved about this book when I first read it, and there is a perfect reason why. It is just so expertly done, and I think I actually ended up listening to it on audiobook and finished it in like a day. Granted, it's not that long, but still that just goes to show how compelling it is. It starts off quick and it keeps you riveted throughout the entire story. So with this one, we basically have a cast of characters who go to this B&B for a getaway. Some of them know each other, some of them don't. Some of them may or may not be interconnected with one another, but regardless, what ends up happening is that they end up being snowed in this remote location, and somebody dies, somebody else dies, and that's when all chaos breaks loose and there's suspicion everywhere. Now, obviously, this is a prime example of closed circle of characters because there is no way, at least as a reader, you're led to believe, but there is no way that anybody outside of this circle could have committed the crime because they are snowed in and there's no way in or out for other people to come and other people to go. Next up, we have the guest list. Now, I know the names are very similar and admittedly the premises are somewhat similar, but they're both well done books, and the guest list is just different enough to where you don't feel like you're getting a rehash, but at the same time, if you loved an unwanted guest, then you will most likely enjoy the guest list as well. Now, as far as this story goes, we've got a cast of characters who are going to a wedding weekend on this remote island. It's very and then there were none, by the way, which is one of the reasons why I loved it. But anyway, the difference with this one is that all of the characters know each other because they're all there for a wedding, and the story actually follows a set group of people. So for example, even though there is a larger pool of people who are attending the wedding, throughout the story you follow, I want to say like 4 or 5 specific characters. So like the bride, the bridesmaid or something like that, the bride's sister. Anyway, I can't remember everybody, but it's really interesting how the author decided to tell the story because you're not getting it from, say, like the detective's point of view, but rather the point of view of the actual cast of characters. And I really enjoyed this one because it gave a lot of atmospheric vibes. It didn't necessarily take place in the wintertime, but I believe at one point there was like a storm or something to where the power was temporarily knocked out. And then even still, just like the descriptions of this large ominous island, it just, it gives you all of those like creepy, eerie, atmospheric mystery vibes, which is another reason why I highly recommend it and put it on this list. Okay, so piggybacking off of that one, I want to talk about one that is very similar, and it's called A Death in the Family. This one, again, I know a lot of these books seem similar in terms of like the setting and the location, but obviously when it comes to these kind of tropes, it's really the author who's writing and the cast of characters helps elevate it and have it distinguished amongst other books within the subgenre. But anyway, as far as A Death in the Family goes, it too takes place on an island. It too has a cast of characters who actually know each other, but that's about where the similarities end. So this one is also interesting because the fact that they know each other plays a huge role in the story because there seems to be a lot of family drama being uncovered because it is this family. Some of them are closer than others. Some of them are kind of like significant others. So they're kind of in the circle, but not necessarily. But regardless, it's obviously a closed circle of characters because they are on this island trapped. I believe in this one, there was also a storm. Again, very similar to the guest list, but at the same time, the writing from the two authors is vastly different. So you're able to get your fill of this subgenre without feeling like you're rehashing the same book, just reskinned with a different cover. Okay, so this next book is actually part of a series, and if you saw my most recent wrap-up video for August, you'll know that I talked about it. It is called Witness in Death, which is the 10th book in the In Death series, and I touched on this earlier in the video, but the basic premise is that we have basically our main heroine, who is a police detective, at the theater with her husband, and they witness a murder on stage. However, the murder was totally accidental. What ends up happening is that in the play, one of the characters was supposed to stab the other character, but the knife is no longer a prop knife. It ends up being a real knife. Now, this one I would consider a closed circle of characters because the theater essentially is very small. The cast of characters literally, is very small and contained. And so our detective obviously has to interview each of the characters to kind of find out their motivation as to why they may or may not be a suspect in this crime. And I enjoyed this one. I think it would actually also be a locked room mystery for the simple fact that it's seemingly impossible, just because, you know, obviously the knives were switched, but it's a closed set. So how did this person manage to sneak a real knife in place of a prop knife? So I really enjoyed this one. As I mentioned, though, it is part of a series. However, don't let that discourage you if you find this premise interesting from checking it out, because even though it's part of a series, I think that it would work well as a standalone, and you're not necessarily going to be lost in terms of, you know, the relationships between the characters, because the author does a pretty good job kind of catching you up to speed without a lot of exposition or info dump. Okay, so piggybacking off of series, I want to talk about Murder on the QE2, which is a Murder, She Wrote book. If you guys have been around for a while, you know that I absolutely adore Murder, She Wrote. Jessica Fletcher is my girl. I watch the shows, obviously, that has now translated into me reading the books, and this is one of my favorites amongst this long-standing series because it takes place on a boat. I have this weird fascination with mysteries that are set on boats. For some reason, it's just really intriguing just because I think the setting itself is fun and glamorous and holds its own set of challenges. And so for that reason, I had to add this to the list, obviously. But because they are on a moving vehicle type thing, it has to be considered a closed circle mystery because, you know, there's no way that anybody outside of the ship could have committed the crime. As far as the premise goes, somebody dies on the ship. Okay, we got that out of the way. But like I said, the cast of characters is small and limited because they are on this ship and it is a smaller cruise. It's not like a carnival cruise or anything like that. It's a very small, intimate cruise, and thus your suspect pool is just as small. And I really enjoyed this one because we get to see Jessica in this cruise type setting. And then on top of that, as she interviews each of the suspects, you see that they may or may not be hiding something. Again, a lot of these end up being kind of character studies because, you know, at first glance before the murder happens, they seem like ordinary people, but as soon as the finger starts being pointed at them or vice versa, their whole demeanor and their character can change. Last up, I probably should have talked about this one as I was talking about the Agatha Christie ones, but we'll chalk it up to it just being written last on my list. But it is Closed Casket by Sophie Hannah. And the reason why I thought I should include it with Agatha Christie, but I didn't, is because technically this is a Hercule Poirot mystery, but it was written by Sophie Hannah, who has kind of recently taken over the Hercule Poirot mysteries. Now, that said, this one is considered a closed circle mystery because what ends up happening is a matriarch, an older woman, calls Poirot to her house because she is afraid that she is going to be murdered. And when he shows up, we've got a cast of characters already there. Some of them are family. I believe most of them are family, but maybe one or two people aren't. But he gets there, the woman is clearly still alive, and she convinces him to stay for the weekend just to kind of like check things out and talk to people so that he can hopefully prevent her death. Well, lo and behold, she ends up being murdered anyway. So because everybody was already there, thus it becomes a closed circle of suspects because it clearly could have only been one of the people within this smaller group. Again, I think this could also double as a locked room mystery, though don't quote me on that because I don't remember the logistics of where she was murdered. If it were her bedroom, then yes, definitely locked room. But regardless, it's still an excellent story. And as someone who has read both the Agatha Christie Poirot and the Sophie Hannah ones, I actually really enjoy Miss Hannah's writing. I know it can be critiqued a lot just because people are such suckers for the original books, but I think she has taken the series on well, treated it well, and I really enjoyed both Hercule Poirot and Catchpool, who is the main investigator who we see things from as he's kind of like following along with Poirot. But regardless, if you're a fan of Agatha Christie and you haven't read it, give it a shot. You know, you have nothing to lose. And if you are a fan of this mystery genre, then definitely check it out as well because I think it's also well done. Okay, so there you have it. I believe quite a few examples, and hopefully you got a better understanding of this subgenre of mysteries. Again, I didn't know what this mystery genre was called, and I was so happy when I stumbled across it because I was able to put a definitive name to this group of books. And so, like I said, from here on out, I'll kind of know what to look out for. But regardless, all of these books, you know, have those things in common. And as I mentioned earlier, there's just something about having a set cast of characters be the suspects that I think really elevates or makes a mystery book more interesting, because you end up being more, I guess, invested in the characters, and you want to look for clues and red herrings along the way, because oftentimes those are supposed to be there so that you can hopefully figure it out, as opposed to some random person being discovered at the 11th hour, and it's like, who is this guy who ended up being the murderer and he's never been talked about before? I don't know, maybe that's just me. But anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, if this genre of books actually sounds familiar, please drop in the comments below if you have read any of these, or if you have read a book that would technically be considered closed circle, let me know what it is so that I can add it to my list. But regardless, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, and I'll talk to you guys later. Happy reading. Bye!